I'm Jeff Hunt. He's Bill Thorpe. What happened at the Supreme Court?
Any surprises in store? Or is it what we expect?
Supreme Court appears likely to uphold transgender athlete bans, keeping men out of women's sports. We're going to talk with Alliance Defending Freedom there on the front lines of this battle. Matt Sharp, ADF Senior Counsel, joining us in just a minute. Now is time for the news.
Blake Olson.
Blake Olson, news and comment.
Hey, good morning. It is Wednesday, 36 and cloudy in Denver, expecting a high of 54 today. Another nice day. News sponsored by Pastor Camp Heating and Air Conditioning at 303-777-1234 to learn more about special savings opportunities on Lennox equipment. Our top story, police in Aurora still searching for a driver who was involved in a crash with an RTD A-Line train Tuesday. Around 50 passengers were commuting eastbound at the time, including Randy Garcia and Sir Oceana.
The train actually stopped really hard, so I know, maybe someone's walking on the tracks or something on the tracks.
I just was on my phone, and I'm like, why are we stopped? And the dude came in the middle like, we just hit a truck. I'm like, oh.
The crash happened just before 10 in the morning on Sable Boulevard near Smith Road. Investigators say the truck drove over the tracks on the wrong side of the road while crossing arms were down. The truck then drove away after the collision. One person on the train was taken to the hospital for minor injuries. DJT is striking back against sanctuary cities like the city of Denver.
Starting February 1st, we're not making any payments to sanctuary cities or states having sanctuary cities because they do everything possible to protect criminals at the expense of American citizens.
11 states and D.C. and 5 of the country's biggest cities stand to lose federal funding because they have laws prohibiting cooperation with immigration agents. Advocates of sanctuary laws claim they make illegal immigrants more willing to cooperate with police. Really? Colorado's AG, Phil Weiser, he plans to create an online portal where citizens can report alleged misconduct by ICE agents. He announced the new portal Tuesday. The AG calls the conduct of some ICE agents outrageous. He added no one is above the law, and there needs to be a way to protect the people of Colorado. Now, did he mean protect the people of Colorado, the citizens, or illegals? I'm confused. The portal will launch on the AG's website next week. Is there a tab, by the way, to report protesters who aren't protesting peacefully? That's my question.
Yeah.
A former teacher at STEM school Highlands Ranch is facing new charges in a case that led to her arrest last year. 45-year-old Tara Johnson Swartz, you may remember this, was originally accused of sexting with a student, taking the student from the school without parental permission and buying the student cigarettes. Prosecutors dropped the original charges in May after the investigation uncovered information that the teacher had sexual relations with the student. Johnson Swartz is now charged with 2 counts of sexual assault on a child and 1 count of sexual assault with a 10-year age difference, as well as second-degree kidnapping and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. She's scheduled for an arraignment hearing in Douglas County next Wednesday. Human rights activists say that over 2,500 people have been killed by Iranian authorities, actually dictators, in the crackdown against the anti-regime protests sweeping Iran. The foreign minister of France is calling it the most violent repression in Iran's contemporary history. Top White House officials will meet with foreign ministers of Denmark and Greenland today as DJT ramps up his talk of acquiring the Danish territory. Last week, Trump said that he'd love to make a deal with them, but one way or another, we're going to have Greenland, quote unquote. It appears the Supreme Court will uphold states' transgender athlete bans. Tuesday, the justices heard two cases challenging whether states can ban transgender girls, men, from participating in girls' and women's sports. The 6-3 conservative majority seems poised to uphold the bans. Thank God. Mike Tomlin stepping down as head coach of the Steelers, 19 seasons, won Super Bowl, never a losing season, but it looks like it's best for both parties. Jamal Murray, 35 points last night, and the Nuggets beat the Pelicans 122-116. Broncos continue preparation, by the way, for the Bills coming up Saturday once again at 2:30 at Mile High Stadium. 35 in Aurora, 34 in Littleton, 36 in Denver. And you are waking up with Jeff and Billy. Blake Olson, News Talk 710 KNUS.
Expect a lot of high and mid-level clouds today, but mild, upper 50s and lower 60s. There is a very small chance of a rain or snow shower tonight as a weak disturbance passes through, lows in the low to mid-30s. Partly cloudy, a little cooler, mid-50s Wednesday, low to mid-30s Wednesday night, 55 to 60 on Thursday. It will trend colder for Friday and Saturday. Friday and Saturday's highs back down into the 40s with overnight lows in the low to mid-20s. Meteorologist Don Day in the 710 KNUS Weather Center.
Welcome back to the Jeff and Bill Show. Big day yesterday at the U.S. Supreme Court. Always fun to see our friends at Alliance Defending Freedom out front fighting the good fight. And they keep winning because they're smart and they know the Constitution. Joining us to provide analysis on what happened yesterday at the U.S. Supreme Court, Matt Sharp, Senior Counsel and Director of the Center for Public Policy. Good morning, Matt. Thanks for joining the Jeff and Bill Show.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
All right, so give people a rundown. What are the cases all about yesterday, and what was the oral arguments like?
Yeah, well, in response to a growing number of stories of men who identify as women, of taking spots from girls, Idaho, West Virginia passed Save Women's Sports laws. These are simply laws that say a man, no matter how he identifies, is not eligible to participate on a women's sports team. Well, immediately the ACLU sues, challenges these laws, and those cases have now bubbled up to the U.S. Supreme Court, where the court is looking at simply the question of, under the Constitution and Title IX, can states pass laws that say a man, no matter how he identifies, cannot participate on a women's sports team? The arguments went very well overall. I think we had some great questions from the justices, especially ones getting to the flaws in the ACLU's argument, the flaws that we don't know what it means to be a man and woman. So overall, I was very encouraged and optimistic that we're going to get a good victory in this case.
Yeah, it seemed to me like this effort to try to shoehorn men into women's sports and allow that to happen, and it just ran up against the logic brick wall yesterday, where, you know, for years this has been pushed and promoted and stuff, but you have to have clarity in law. That's part of the process, is we need to get clear on terms, definitions, who's allowed where, all that. And when it comes down to it, the transgender promotion side really can't be clear. That's what it seems like to me. It's just ethereal. It's just kind of floats around. Well, whoever identifies as a woman is a woman. Well, that's not a definition as to what a woman is. And in law, we have decided as a country we're going to create specific sports, not all sports. You can have co-ed sports, but we're going to have some sports reserved for men, some sports reserved for women. And if you can't be clear as to what the definition of a woman is, well, then you have no definition. What's your response?
That's absolutely right. In fact, there was a great exchange involving Justice Alito and the ACLU attorneys saying, do you concede that we can have men's and women's teams? Yes, Your Honor. Well, to do that, don't you need definitions of sex, of male and female? Yes. Well, can you tell me what those are? No, we can't. That's ridiculous. How can you say that you can't define what it means to be a male and female? You've got to understand that in order to have men's and women's teams. Well, that's what Idaho and West Virginia have said. We know what a man and woman is, and we want to make clear that a male cannot take a spot on a woman's team. And this goes beyond sports because it also matters for locker rooms, restrooms, dormitories, all of these things. And so when the ACLU is bringing these cases, what they really are advocating for is to erase what it means to be male and female and replace it with this fluid, subjective, self-chosen gender identity.
But Matt Sharp, ADF Senior Counsel, what about people that identify as transgender? What about their rights? What about their ability to compete in sports? Aren't we being bigoted? Aren't we shutting the door, keeping them out of the ability to do so?
Not at all. Look, everybody has a place to compete in sports. The question is, what's the most fair way to do it? We don't allow a 250-pound guy to wrestle against a 150-pound guy. We don't allow a 19-year-old to be on a 12-year-old's baseball team. And we don't allow men to compete in women's sports. That's all these states are doing is setting eligibility rules and saying, we want males, no matter how they identify, to compete. You can be on a men's team, you can be on a co-ed team, but you can't take a spot away from a deserving girl on a girl's team.
In light of that argument, I just want to explore it a little bit. I'll play the devil's advocate here. Well, why not then come up with maybe size, weight requirements that are similar as opposed to just a blanket, if you're a man, you can't compete with a woman?
Well, in many sports, we have that. But when it comes to having men's and women's categories, we know that if you look at the science, and this begins even at age 6, the differences between men and women in terms of physical sports performance begin to just rapidly grow. And so we know that on average, any male athlete is going to be able to run faster, hit harder, throw further than a female athlete. So the best way to have fairness in sports is to have that categorical rule that says we're going to have a men's division so that men are competing with other similar athletes, and we're going to have a women's division. And the moment you start getting blurry in that line and saying, well, this boy has been on puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones, if you allow one male to come over to the women's category, you're essentially saying that every single spot on a girl's team could be captured by a male. So when you take this argument of the ACLU to its logical extreme, the women's category is erased by we know it. And that's why even the court was saying common sense recognizes we can have men's and women's categories, something that they even got the ACLU to concede.
That's Matt Sharp, ADF Senior Counsel. I want to follow up on that a little bit. And this isn't necessarily, it's not a question that pertains to this case, but it is a legal question and a bit more ethereal. What do we do with trans student athletes then? And the reason I ask is if we put them in the sport of their biological sex, are we creating an environment that can be and could be anticipated to be rampant with abuse? And you have trans athletes that are trying to present their identity inside of that social setting with the school, and the school mandates they have to do something that directly disagrees with it. I'm not advocating to say that people born of one biological sex should be able to compete in a physical sport of the opposite sex. I think things like intellectual sports like chess and speech and debate, it doesn't really matter at that point. But physical, I can see the issue. The question I have is, are we coming to a point where we just are going to tell those trans athletes, no, you can't compete on a team unless you do this? Which is, again, and the reason I'm asking is I can see a future where a group like the ACLU can hold up an example of a trans female that competed on a male team and was subjected to abuse, ridicule. It may have even gotten kinetic, and the ACLU will argue that should have been anticipated given how the community is treated, especially in that environment. So what do we do with that?
I would separate those into two questions. Number one is, can we have eligibility rules? And I would say with all of these, when we're talking about whether you're male or female, when we're talking about size and weight requirements, even academic performance, these are all eligibility rules. And schools have long been able to say, you're not eligible to compete on certain teams based on these physical factors or even sometimes based on your grades. That is something that states can do, and that's part of what Idaho, West Virginia, and the 25 states that have done this are attempting to do, is maintain these eligibility rules of who can and cannot compete on a girls' team. But beyond that, we would absolutely say, regardless of whatever state law is, schools can also and should also have strong rules protecting against bullying and harassment for any student. So we can both maintain the integrity of women's sports and still make sure that every student that wants to play has a spot to play on and can do so free from harassment, bullying, or a negative environment. We can have both, and that's what we ought to be advocating for. But what the ACLU wants to push is really the erasure of the women's category, the erasure of what it means to be male and female. And I think that's a hard line that we have to draw in the sand to say we cannot get rid of the women's category. We cannot get rid of accurate definitions of sex, because when we do so, we know that it's women going to be harmed. Because it's not just losing a spot on the team or a championship medal, but in several of our cases, we've had young girls that have been sexually harassed in the locker room because a male that identifies as a female was allowed in. We've had girls that have been injured on the playing field because males have been allowed to compete. That's what we have to protect against.
That's Matt Sharp, Senior Counsel for the Alliance Defending Freedom. We really appreciate your time. And I think that was the strongest argument that was made in front of the Supremes yesterday, was the idea that these organizations need to have the ability to set up eligibility rules. And this has been a constant since the school systems basically started these types of competitions and games and teams and things like that. And that's it. They should be allowed to design their own eligibility rules. But I want to explore right at the end there where you talked about the sexual harassment. I'm really worried about that, of a trans female that harassed other females inside a locker room setting. And you were talking about protecting it. And that's kind of where I'm going with the idea of some of those trans athletes. If we say, well, if you're a trans female, you're biologically born as a male, you just got to go compete with the boys. I figure when you are setting them up, what we've seen in those type of settings, those trans females are abused. They're sometimes beaten. They're attacked. We've had trans females attacked in school bathrooms. And that's what I'm worried, that we are setting up a system that is going to allow for that abuse to occur just to a different subset of students. And I think that is the conversation that we need to have, that we're not really willing to have yet, about what to do with them as participants. Just for a second here, Matt, there was an example inside one of the plaintiffs that was trying to make a college team, and she didn't, and she then ended up playing club sports. For me personally, if I was going to wave the Jeff and Bill magic wand, that I think might be the solution, is the idea that club sports, not the school sponsored, etc., might be the better place, because club sports in and around schools have had intramurals and intergender competitions before. There have been mixed flag football teams, mixed soccer teams, mixed volleyball teams. All of those has happened before. But that's the issue, is I'm worried that we are setting up one community for abuse by trying to protect another. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you hit a good point. There are lots of ways to categorize sports, and one of the solutions that every single one of these laws, the 27 states that have passed these laws, every single one of them allow a male that identifies as female to play on the men's team or a co-ed team. And we've told states that have passed these, create lots of co-ed teams. You can create lots of opportunities for both sexes to compete, but what we have to preserve is that female category. There have to be those opportunities for young women to compete against other young women on a fair and level playing field, not have to worry about losing out to a male, not have to worry from an injury that could happen from a male athlete being able to participate. And we know that this is not just about the podium, but the lifelong benefits that flow from women being able to be champions in their own sports, that it impacts things like, learning, overcoming adversity and all of these things. And there was a survey of women business leaders that upwards of 90% of them pointed to their involvement in sports as changing their life and help shaping them to what they ultimately become. We know that for some of our clients, sports gave them scholarships that opened the door to pursue their callings and careers. We have to preserve the female category and preserve accurate understanding of male and female and make sure that those opportunities are not lost for the next generation.
That's Matt Sharp, Senior Counsel, Alliance Defending Freedom. We're talking the U.S. Supreme Court oral arguments that took place yesterday. SCOTUS blog saying that the court's 3 Democratic appointees appeared to recognize that the challenges faced an uphill battle. they seem to devote much of their efforts to mitigating their losses, either by getting one case thrown out or by limiting the court's decision to narrow one. In my mind, this should be a 9-0 decision in support of women's sports. It's very clear what Title IX was all about, and this has been an effort, as I mentioned at the very beginning, to try to shoehorn in the trans agenda into women's sports. What would be a possible outcome of this? Why wouldn't it be 9-0? What would a 6-3 decision look like, and how could they possibly mitigate their losses? What is your response, Matt Sharp?
Yeah, well, I agree. It ought to be a 9-0. Like, even the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when she was ruling that women should be allowed into the Virginia Military Institute, still said that doesn't mean we ignore the physiological differences, and that you can have separate housing for men and women. You can have separate physical fitness tests recognizing those differences. So this ought to be a 9-0. But whatever the outcome, whether it's 9-0 or 6-3, ultimately we want to see Idaho and West Virginia and the laws of the 25 other states upheld so that they can go into effect. We think that's a simple, straightforward ruling recognizing that Title IX and the Constitution allow for states to protect the integrity of women's sports and to have common sense distinctions between men and women in those places it matters, like sports, like locker rooms, restrooms, dormitories, and other places like that. So that's what we hope to see. But ultimately, we know that there's still going to be 23 other states, California, Colorado, Connecticut, where we've got an ongoing case on behalf of female athletes who've lost out on opportunities. We've got to protect the interest of women in those states as well. So I think that's where the next legal battle is going to be shaping up, is to say, how do we make sure that no matter where a young girl lives, she is guaranteed a fair and level playing field?
And there's a case coming up in Colorado, too, that with regards to prisoners, transgender prisoners, and even how you strip search them and who's required to do so, and can they sue the state if it's not somebody that is of the same biological sex. This gets very complicated very quickly. Matt Sharp, we're not attorneys. You're the only attorney in this conversation right now. Help people understand when this decision will be made. What's the process with the U.S. Supreme Court?
So after the court heard arguments yesterday, the justices will now meet and cast their votes. Based on that, they're going to select someone to write the majority opinion. You'll then have a minority opinion from the dissenting justices. But we'll expect a ruling sometime in June. And again, based on what I saw from the argument yesterday and even the ACLU conceding, yes, we recognize that states can have men's and women's teams. They're just struggling to be able to define what it means to be a man and a woman. We think we're going to see a great outcome from the court, a strong ruling upholding these laws. And ultimately, that's going to impact millions of young girls. And that's really at the heart of this case, is women and girls have been standing up, speaking out, passing these laws, standing before the Supreme Court and just simply saying, give us our fair and level playing field. Give us the promises of Title IX so that we have those opportunities that were available for over 50 years now under Title IX. We don't want those stripped away by men coming into women's sports.
Matt Sharp, Senior Counsel, Alliance Defending Freedom, doing a great job leading this fight. Go to adflegal.org, adflegal.org, if you want to be more involved. Matt, we sure appreciate your time this morning. Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll continue. Faith, family, freedom, these values define the American tradition and are increasingly under attack. The Centennial Institute at Colorado Christian University is dedicated to remaining a committed voice for Christian conservative principles. Through their public events, publications, and student initiatives, they are committed to delivering world-class programming that empowers citizens of all ages to stand boldly for conservative values and engage with the pressing issues of the day with grace and truth. The need to promote principled conservatism and train the next generation of conservative leaders to speak with moral clarity and conviction is more urgent than ever. Join the Centennial Institute at Colorado Christian University in their work to recommit the culture to faith, family, freedom, and future. Learn more at centennial.ccu.edu. That's centennial.ccu.edu. On this issue, one of the text messages here, 8422. I know the topic's on your show today because of the Supreme Court hearing yesterday, but my gosh, we spend a lot of time talking about the trans BS. It's exhausting. They write, well, it's a point of major cultural debate, as you point out, Bill.
Yeah, it is.
But there's also 3 petitions out there on this issue that have reached the 75% threshold, and they still have a few months to do so. That's being led by Protect Kids Colorado, Aaron Lee, that would protect children from irreversible sex change procedures and protect girls' single-sex sports and locker rooms. So you are likely, very likely, going to be voting on this issue in November. So we talk about decisions you have to make.
And one of the things I pointed out to the texter is the idea that it was a center point inside of the Trump campaign, especially within the last 4 weeks. How often did you see the advertisement featuring Charlemagne the God talking about transgender surgeries for prisoners behind bars? And how many times when Trump issues his long screed of how the Democrats are trying to destroy this country, does he refer to them wanting transgender for everyone? And he said that a number of times. And I think that's important because he looks at it and the way that he is presenting it is as if it is going to tear down the society. And that's why I'm necessarily aware of it and why it's a little bit of a nerve for me, because in that statement, I hear him saying that an entire segment of our society is a problem and we need to deal with it. That transgender for everybody is a problem and it's something that he's campaigning against and that we can't have. What I hear in that statement and that sentiment is that the transgender people need to go away. And that's why we come back to this over and over and over again. How many times have we had people call in here and say that them being asked to refer to somebody else by a different name or a different pronoun is a horrible offense to them, and it's hard, and that shouldn't be demanded of them. We hear that all the time. So that's why we go back to it over and over again.
Yeah, I think it changed. It changed on 2 fronts because we've had transvestites in society for a while. One, that the idea that you can change your gender became something that was promoted, pushed, and sought to be accepted in general culture. And then 2, it became a lot more popular to do that and accepted, I guess, a lot more accepted to do that, particularly with kids where you're dealing with irreversible damage to them. And that's where culture started to turn against it. But feel free to join the conversation. Would love to hear from you. Supreme Court appears likely to uphold transgender athlete bans. Is that a good decision? Should it be 9-0? Should it be 6-3? Or is this just another example of conservatives picking on a small subset of the population? You're listening to The Jeff and Bill Show.
This is Denver's talk leader, News Talk 710, KNUS.
Welcome back to the Jeff and Bill Show. Text messages hot as we discussed yesterday's U.S. Supreme Court oral arguments. What does it mean when Supreme Court justices can't even define what a woman is?
I was disappointed in that because again, I've done that on this air, and there are answers, and there are ways to approach
what's the
that.
answer?
The answer is that sex is biological and gender is a sociological construct. We've gone back and forth. We can get into the space rounds if we want to, but that's the answer. And then the further answer on that is this law and are these rules dealing with the biology of the sex or the gender construct of, the sociological gender construct? What is it dealing with? And as, Matt Sharp pointed out, ADF senior counsel that was just with us, there are qualifications and restrictions placed on all sorts of sports. And one of those for decades has been that of sex, in part because female athletes were for years denied access to sports. So we have delineated that based on biological sex. It seems fair to continue those types of separations. Now, that does then beg the question, what about the trans athletes? But it was really bad when I heard a number of the justices try to answer that question. I was like, you guys are infinitely smarter than I am. How come you haven't been able to figure this out? Which let me think that they haven't considered it. That if they weren't good with the answer, they hadn't considered it.
The challenge, though, is in that worldview, they don't make that distinction. And reality is based upon gender identity, not biological sex. So that's why they go assigned at birth, right? Your sex assigned at birth, as if it was just some random assignment in elementary school, as opposed to an actual reality that's going to affect your life. So the problem is in the progressive worldview, where reality becomes identity, not necessarily the other way. Namir texting in, good morning, guys. Interesting subject. I have an idea to please everybody. Please leave natural male and female athletes alone and create a third category. I don't care what you call it. Lefties and communists are working hard on breaking this country apart. Still love your show. Thank you, Namir.
Yeah,
wouldn't that be an example of separate but equal?
The issue for me is, I understand that, but are there enough trans athletes? If we created a trans athlete division in any sport here in Colorado, you're not getting more than a handful of kids. So you're not going to be able to create any sort of a league, any sort of a system. And that is functionally the problem and some of what Matt and I were discussing. And it was a very nice discussion, but some of what we're discussing is those individuals that are trans athletes, what do you do with them? Because you're not going to allow them to compete in the sport that they identify with based on their gender, and you're going to put them into sports categories based on their biological sex, and that can open them up for abuse, ridicule, even more. And we probably could anticipate that. And so if you can anticipate these people are going to be possibly harassed or harmed, because that's the argument against putting trans females into the female locker rooms or bathrooms. An anticipation of abuse. And we've seen it the other way. When trans females are in male bathrooms and locker rooms, there's abuse that is taking place there. So it is reasonable to assume that will happen. So it's hard to make the argument that the solution is to take one group and protect them from abuse while exposing the other group, even though it's smaller, to the abuse. The problem we can't have the leagues is because there simply aren't enough trans athletes.
I mean, it doesn't seem to the trans community enough to just have a third space, another bathroom to be able to go into. They claim that if you identify as a male, you are a male, and they get every right and opportunity to be able to participate and engage in that. And if you're saying no, you can't be in a female locker room just because you identify as one, you're a bigot. You're small-minded. You're, horrible person.
Well, the issue is that most of the time, if you're presenting as either female or male, Outside of things like bathrooms, very rarely does any sort of sexual discrimination happen. There isn't a whole lot of other choices. So the idea of someone that is a trans male or trans female, 99% of the time, they can exist in their lives completely and totally normal. The other part is that, remember, the fear that comes from women having trans women in that bathroom or locker room doesn't come from trans women. It comes from biological males. Their fear is the biology, not the trans. And that's something we need to keep in mind, that it is all of us that are the biological males that are the problem. They're not afraid of the trans females. They're afraid of the biology contained therein. And that's an important portion of this that we need to keep in mind.
6720, you couldn't even have a trans category because the men who are transitioning to women would dominate the women transitioning to men. But then you'd have two trans categories.
I'm not certain about that.
Now we're at 4 categories.
I'm not convinced of that because, as a texter pointed out, we have biological females that identify as females playing on high school hockey teams. My high school hockey team, and this is decades ago, had a girl on it. A girl from, this will be fun, Jeff, Lutheran High School. Joni McKibben. Yep.
Played on the
Joni McKibben.
men's.
Yeah, she played on the men's hockey team because there wasn't a organized female league around at the time, and she had played intramural and she had played co-ed, and so she played on our high school team. So we do have examples of that happening already. And I think that if we're talking about the trans athletes, it is going to be a co-ed kind of a league. Do I think it's going to be sanctioned by CHASA and everything else? Probably not for a long time. But can there be something co-ed and intramural? Yeah. In fact, a lot of the flag football teams that exist in Colorado high schools right now started as that sort of informal club participation. That's how those started. That's what I think it starts as.
3674 texted in, what about the gay games? I like to point out that Jared Polis not gay enough to get the gay games to Denver.
We didn't have enough rainbows. Sorry.
They went with Australia.
Yeah, Australia, New Zealand or something, yeah.
Anticipating that. I just like to dig a little bit.
Oh, absolutely.
Jarhead.
Absolutely.
Oh, more debates over. You're just into these debates on Minnesota.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's fun. And it's a totally different discussion and separation. Yeah, it's just there are a couple of textures, and I have completely and totally different views on what happened in that situation.
I know. There's like whole-on debates that aren't even broadcast that take place on these text message
Yeah, exactly.
lines.
That's why, it's you take the time, we'll have conversations. They don't even have to
Billy
relate necessarily.
does talk back.
Yeah, I do.
He's a lot better at that.
Well, the thing is, y'all listening have taken the time to pick up that phone and to send us a message. And so if it seems reasonable or a response, sometimes it's just notes and messages, which are wonderful. But if it seems reasonable that we can engage in a discussion, I think it's fantastic because it's another avenue to communicate with y'all sitting out there. And the fact that you're spending any time with us at all as you're getting ready in the morning is fascinating. I can't believe it. I can't say thank you enough. So I'm going to do everything I can to engage with you as open and honestly as possible, however that occurs, even here on the text messages.
All right. Feel free to join the conversation. 303-696-1971. Text us on the Dan Caplis Law text line, 720-819-5115. Let's talk modern rugged leather. From city streets to mountain trails, your gear should go wherever life takes you. That's why at Modern Rugged Leather, every bag is handcrafted from premium, responsibly sourced leather, designed to look sharp, last long, and tell a story of its own. Each stitch, buckle, and strap reflects timeless craftsmanship and is backed by a lifetime warranty because quality shouldn't quit when the adventure begins. Whether it's the boardroom or the back roads, Modern Rugged Leather helps you carry confidence every step of the way. Modern Rugged Leather, modern style, timeless durability, backed for life. Life's going to take you places. Make sure your gear keeps up. Shop the full collection and find yours today at modernrugged.com. These are absolutely the most beautiful leather bags I've ever seen. Modernrugged.com. Again, that's modernrugged.com.
And here's the cool thing with the stuff that you're going to get out of Modern Rugged and the leather quality. One, it's just fantastic quality. They've got great craftsmanship. But the thing is, and people know this, if you've had a leather bag, leather jacket, something like that, there's this break-in cycle. And once it breaks in and it loosens up a little bit and the coloring gets a little bit and it has some character to it, that's when it really becomes special, when it becomes lived in, and it doesn't fray, tear, or do the other stuff that some of those regular nylon composite type gym bags or briefcases and stuff that you got doesn't have any of those. It has got style, and it's also something that when you order these bags, when you order the stuff that comes to us from Misty Mountain Incorporated, when you walk into that room, you're making a statement. You're not making a statement like, hey, look at all my fringe and sparkles. You're making a statement that everyone in that room is going to take you seriously. You take one of these bags and you put it on the desk afterwards and you're taking your stuff out in that meeting. Yeah, you're going to get a level of respect. I'm just saying, this is a cache that really can help your, your approval rating. I used to get compliments. I had a leather bag for a while when I was running around doing some radio stuff, and the number of times I got compliments on that thing, it gave you a level of competency. So again, sometimes you need to hide that. Fake it till you make it. This is a great way to give yourself a step up in your appearance, in your game. Plus, it'll be something that is going to stick around for years.
Yes.
This isn't going to wear out like something you're going to buy at the store right now. This is something that you're going to be hanging out with. People are going to ask you 15, 20 years from now, where'd you get that? Like, hey, this is a radio show I was listening to. I wonder what happened to those guys. That's what you'll be doing.
All right, join us. Would love to hear from you. 303-696-1971. Text us on the Dan Caplis Law text line at 720-819-5115. You're listening to The Jeff and Bill Show.
This is Denver's Talk Leader, News Talk 710, KNUS.
Welcome back to the Jeff and Bill Show. Supreme Court appears likely to uphold transgender athlete bans. We spoke with Alliance Defending Freedom fighting this battle earlier this hour. We're getting your reaction. Let's go to the phone lines. Brian and Arvada. Good morning, Brian. You're on with Jeff and Bill.
Morning.
Morning, guys. Hey, this whole transgender thing, it's an ongoing thing we've had to deal with in society for the past 10 years now. But I think we can start where we agree more than where we disagree. And if we can do that, I think people can come together with common sense solutions or common sense approaches. The Supreme Court's going to rule correctly, hopefully. Men shouldn't be playing in women's sports. Unfair, it's unsafe. We can all agree on that. People are getting hurt, people are getting injured, records are being broken, scholarships are being taken away from people. That's not fair. So, there's that issue. And then bathrooms, private spaces, and safe spaces, we can agree men should not be in women's locker rooms. They shouldn't be in women's bathrooms. For whatever reason, even if and they're going to the bathroom the way they go to the bathroom, a woman shouldn't have to hear that. She shouldn't have to go through that. I think that's common sense. The issue I have is...
Yeah. Oh, Brian, just before you get to the issue that you have,
got
a question. Why do you think that the women feel a sense of danger in those situations?
Because my wife's told me she has.
Oh, no, I'm saying,
because
but why?
My
what was the reason?
Told me.
I know, but what's the reason? Why are your wife and daughter feeling that way?
It makes them feel very uncomfortable that somebody that has a member that they don't have in the same room as them urinating.
Yeah.
Yes.
It
absolutely makes them feel uncomfortable.
Yep, absolutely. And I understand that, and I recognize that, and I honor that. And the reason that I bring that out is it probably has very little to do with the behavior of a trans female and a hell of a lot more to do with the behavior of a biological male. And that's what I mean is all of us dudes are the reason that your wife and your daughter are afraid. Not really because of the trans female. It has to do with the behavior of all the other guys walking around because that's their experience. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I wouldn't tell my wife that because she's pretty independent and she makes her own decisions, not based on how I feel or anything like that.
Oh no, but she's probably worried. She's probably worried not because of an interaction with a trans female, but because of interactions with biological males.
No, she's just worried. She's not worried. It makes her uncomfortable to hear somebody doing what they do when they go to the bathroom, knowing it's not a woman. It just makes her feel uncomfortable, and she should not have to be put in that position for a very small, minute segment of the population.
Okay,
and that's just common sense.
I understand that. I understand that, Brian, but I doubt she would have that same feeling if she was raising boys. I'm just saying. That's what I'm saying is context is a matter there. But continue. This is a rabbit hole we can go down, but we shouldn't this time because of the time and everything else. And I want to get to what concerns you because I think that's better in this conversation. You and I can fight about this forever, man. But we can just leave to the side. We can pick this one up another day.
You're
man.
right.
But yeah, continue. So Brian, what's your major concern?
Agree on, except for Billy. Billy can't agree on that common sense thing, but that's fine. But what I'm saying is, it's when you're forcing behavior, you're forcing people to do things that they don't want to do. So you're forcing somebody to accommodate people. You're forcing people to call somebody something. Again, I don't care what you call yourself. I don't care how you act. I don't care what you do. But don't force me to have to believe that or call you that. Now, will I do it out of respect? Sure. I don't want to disrespect anybody. But when it comes to my private spaces, when it comes to my child's private spaces, when it comes to sports, don't force me to do anything. And if I don't choose, I'm respecting your right to choose your gender. Well, respect my right to choose. I don't believe you are that gender. And that's where the left really confuses this argument, because I'm a transphobe because I don't want somebody in a locker room with my daughter. I'm a transphobe because I don't want somebody to slam a volleyball into my daughter's face during a game. So that's where we're getting off track. Is I'm not transphobic. Do whatever you want, but we can't make accommodations for these people, and they can't force us to call them or act a certain way around them if we don't believe it.
Yeah, I can see where you're going with that, Brian. There is a part with that I agree with you based on the sports side and, locker rooms and bathrooms. But then when we get into pronouns, you and I probably would disagree on some of that. And I do agree with you that some of the major detriment to the trans movement, and by trans movement, I'm just talking about acceptability, that they're looking to be accepted in society, has been the push for them to be in sports, because we have seen some consequences based on differences in biology. And to me, I come back to when the gay rights movement was getting larger and larger, and there were people inside of the gay rights movement that were saying, hey, when we hold these parades and y'all show up in a bunch of leather and flashing a lot of skin, it doesn't help the perception of the movement, because those outsized characterizations are the ones that portrayed on the media, rather than a bunch of guys walking by in khakis and polos, which also existed in those marches, but they weren't the ones that got the attention or the eyeballs. And so I do agree that some of this push for them to be absolutely accepted in the athletic sphere does do a lot of damage to trans acceptability. If they would have just pushed to the idea of, can you just please use my right pronoun and use my name and just treat me like this in the workspace, they probably would have done a better job at acceptance at this point. We wouldn't probably be having this fight.
Yeah, when you shove it down somebody's throat, which I think the Obama administration did, you get the pushback, that's going to hurt your cause. If you want me to say, hey, out of respect, will you call me Sally or call me Julie? I would say, sure. But when you say, no, you need to call me this, or I'm going to sue you, or I'm going to have a lawsuit with the Colorado Equality Board, what they did to Jack and his cakes, then you're going to get a pushback that's going to hurt your cause. So if you want to come to me and look me in the eye and say, out of respect, I believe this about myself,
Brian,
I would respect it.
That's the problem with leftism, is
they
that,
won't do that.
While they don't have power, it's all about coexistence, right? You remember the bumper stickers that used to be around? When Colorado was a Republican state, they drive around with coexistence bumper stickers. Now that they got control, how many lawsuits are we on? 4, 5 now from the state of Colorado to the U.S. Supreme Court just on the ability to maintain our values. They don't believe in coexistence. They believe in forcing their agenda, particularly through schools, on all the kids. And we're going to get into that next as enrollment in Colorado in public schools declines. Appreciate the call, Brian. You're listening to The Jeff and Bill Show.
This is 710 KNUS. We'll be right back.